Sometimes folk will make you look smarter than you are. So I just thank God that I listened to the Spirit and a couple of folks who whispered in my ear to invite her. Praise the Lord. We are moving now into a time of our second presentation on the way forward. Reverend Tom Berlin is going to speak to us this morning. He is a native of Winchester, Virginia, and a graduate of Virginia Tech and Candler School of Theology at Emory. In his current appointment, he serves as lead pastor of Flourish United Methodist Church in Herndon, Virginia. Before that, he served as pastor in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Tom has co-authored a book with Lovett Weems, Bearing Fruit, Ministry with Real Results. Tom shares his life and his work and his ministry with his wife, Karen Berlin. They have 4 daughters, Rebecca, Catherine, Hannah, and Sarah. And so I am excited that he is here to snuck in behind me, amen. That he is here. Beyond what's on the paper, his bishop, my sister, Bishop Sharma Lewis, said that the way that he has offered himself to this work is impressive and phenomenal. And the way that he's willing to go out across this connection and help us understand the work of the Commission on a Way Forward. There's a lot of misunderstanding out there about what was voted on in General Conference in 2016, what was asked of the Commission, and then what the Commission has presented to the Council of Bishops. And so he has been able to bring understanding out of chaos. And so we thank you again for being here with us today, and we welcome you to this Baltimore-Washington Conference.
It is my pleasure to be with you. I have served, Bishop, if you go back to seminary, you want to go back to Wesley Seminary, because that's where she is. And well, I know, but you know, we send her reluctantly. But I serve on the board of Wesley Seminary with some of your annual conference members, both laity and clergy. It's been such a privilege to get to know them, and through observing them, I know of the diligence of your faith. I know of your passion for the church and for all that is before the church, but also your desire to reach people in your communities with the good news of the love of Jesus Christ. And so it's a real pleasure to be with you today and to talk about the work of the Commission on the Way Forward. I've been serving on the Commission on the Way Forward for the past 80 years. It's been a pleasure. I've grown older during that time. I hope I've grown wiser. I am going to share with you a presentation that is drawn from a number of sources. Some of these slides are my own. Some of them are from Gil Rendell, who is the consultant that's been working very closely with the Commission. And then some are just, actually some of them come from Bishop Easterling, who I believe has posted one of the best Episcopal responses about the work of the Commission and the clarity of the plans that are coming before General Conference. I've been very grateful for that, Bishop. And so if some of my work looks similar to hers, that's because I stole it. And that's what we do, right? I'm a pastor. I'm just a pastor, you know. I'm doing this every week like you. So let me share with you some things, if I can have my first slide. The work of and you're going to see a lot of text on these slides. Go to the next slide, please. You're going to see a lot of text on these slides, and that's because some of you learn by reading, and some of you learn by listening. And I know presenters are supposed to have very simple slides, but this is complicated work. So I'm going to have a number of things before you. My goal is to have about 25 to 30 minutes of presentation, and then to reserve about 20 minutes for question and answer. And so you may want to make a few notes, and if there's something you want to really ask about, I'd be very pleased to answer any questions you have. And question and answer, isn't it the most exciting thing you get to do? Because you don't know what's coming. And so I'm going to go fast just so we can get to that. Okay, so here are the issues that are before the commission. We have disagreement about paragraph 161.g. Many in the church call this the offensive language. It's the incompatible language. We also are talking about whether the United Methodist Church and our clergy will be able to offer same-sex marriage services. It's also about the ordination of self-avowed practicing homosexual persons and what might lie before us in the future related to those concerns. There are issues before us, as I said, and those three issues are the presenting issues, but there are other more important, as important issues that come along with that. One is our ability to reach LGBTQ persons and include them in the life of the church. And it's funny, I changed that slide, but I don't think I updated it here. And their allies. And their allies. So I have 4 daughters, and you would call my 4 daughters their allies. And so not every younger person, 30 and under person, is more progressive on this issue, but the survey data in America says that the majority are. And my 4 daughters are in that group. And what they have said is, Dad, I'm just not that interested in being a part of a church that excludes my friends. Now, that is one view. That is one view. And there are also people who have children. I have another member of my extended family who's in that age bracket, and that person's more traditional. So there it is within one family. We have a diversity of views. And then I've also got other members of my family who would just rather not talk about it. Right? Does this sound like your church? So essentially, when my family gathers, I'm in your church. So we have disagreement on the interpretation of Scripture related to same-sex relationships, and we have people leaving our churches, both progressive people and traditional people leaving our churches. And that's what's difficult in this. We're asking questions about who can we reach, but we're also asking questions about who are we going to lose. And that's why this is that's one set of reasons that this is a very complicated set of issues. Next slide, please. Albert Einstein said we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. So apparently, getting together every 4 years since 1972 and having a large meeting that is more like the United Nations than the U.S. Congress. Now just think about that sentence for a second. No, it's not as easy as being the U.S. Congress. It's like being the United Nations. That's what we are like when we meet at General Conference. And so apparently doing this in a highly ordered Robert's Rules meeting every 4 years is not going to lead us to a sense of resolution where people are going to stay within keeping of the Book of Discipline. Apparently that's not going to work. So as you heard yesterday, and I won't repeat, you had a great presentation yesterday that I'm going to try not to repeat. But you heard how the commission was created. You understand that. And those of you who weren't here yesterday, you can go back and get that information. But Jesus said it this way. He said, no one sews a piece of new unshrunken cloth onto old clothes. No one pours new wine into old wineskins. So if we're going to get to a different place, in a place of peace, we're going to have to use a different procedure and a different process. That was the idea of the commission. Next slide, please. So you had this reviewed yesterday. The commission includes 32 people, 9 nations, 15 states. I feel really embarrassed because just this morning in my hotel room, I made it 9 nations plural, but it's not up there, so you can imagine. You can imagine how frustrated I am with myself. 15 states, straight people, gay people, laity, elders, deacons, bishops, men and women, all jurisdictions, a full span of generations, and we were across the ideological spectrum. Everybody was in that room in that sense. Now, it was also 32 people. But it's really very difficult to get work done so that people can speak in a group much larger than that, is my experience. Next slide, please. It's a different kind of report because it doesn't come from like-minded people. It comes from people with very mixed views. The report is not a product of debate and parliamentary procedure. It's really a product of Christian conversation. I have never been in such well-planned, well-ordered meetings in the United Methodist Church in my lifetime. And I've been serving as a pastor for about 30 years, and I've done work at all levels of our church, including meetings that I myself have led. Let me just add that. The moderating bishops were outstanding, and people showed up prepared. You know how people sometimes show up at a Bible study that you lead, and you just look around the room and you know that some people are fudging it because they didn't really do the reading? Would you raise your hand if you've ever had that happen? And you know deep in your heart they're just faking it, right? Well, here's the beauty of this group. These 32 people unfailingly showed up prepared. People just stepped into this work, and they said, you know what, I'm totally committed, and we're committed to one another. And when the moderators told us, at lunch, we want you to sit with somebody and eat with somebody that you don't know. We want you to learn about a culture from which you did not come. We want you to hear about opinions which you do not share. And I watched members of our commission, meal after meal, day after day, 9 meetings that were 3 to 4 days at a time, where everybody's in the same hotel, everybody's going to the same meeting, breakfast, lunch, dinner. I mean, we really were in community with one another, and we were able to find community with one another. And that's why it's a different process. I've been to General Conference 4 times. That experience I have never had at General Conference, and I'm not against General Conference. I'm just telling you that the form of General Conference does not allow this type of work. This is what the church traditionally calls conciliar work. Would you say that word? Conciliar work. It's sort of like when they wrote the Nicene Creed. They didn't show up in a group of this size and do Robert's Rules and say, I vote for the Holy Trinity. They didn't do that. They sat down over years of time. That's conciliar work. So we had 17 months. People were sometimes angered and upset, but they never left the table. Okay, a couple times they left the table. A couple times. But the point is, they didn't stop participating in the commission. Sometimes people would say, I'm going to need to step out of the room for a few moments. I'll be back. I saw straight people do that. I saw gay people do that. I saw traditional people do that. I saw very progressive people do that. And in patience and in love, we looked at one another and said, you know what, let's all just take a break. We had to learn new words. We had to share a glossary so that we wouldn't offend each other in the way that we said things. On day 2, we stopped our work because gay members of the commission said, I think we need to create a glossary because this is going to be really hard if you all keep talking like this. Well, listen, people who come from cultures where homosexuality is simply not discussed do not have a glossary. And some, even in America, are not sensitive to the words that we sometimes use. So it was that type of work. It was that type of a relationship in that room. And it was a product of conversation, study, prayer, listening, transparency, and trust. Yes, we did look at the Bible together. Yes, we did pray at every single session. Yes, we did celebrate the Holy Communion. Yes, we did worship together. It's going to be tempting for you to stand up having to seen these slides and say, this wasn't spiritual enough, because it's not going to be as reflected in the slides because I've got a limited time to give a lot of information. I want you to know that this was one of the most spiritual experiences I've ever had in the United Methodist Church. It's one thing to be spiritual when we have devotions together and we all say, isn't that good? It's another thing to vehemently disagree with each other and hold each other in Christian love out of the convictions of the Bibles that we read that morning. So we studied books of the Bible like Galatians, like Ephesians, where the church was in conflict, and we learned from that, and that's reflected in the nature of our relationships. Next slide. The United Methodists, let me just say, there are no full solutions. When we finished the work, a member of the commission saw the look on my face and texted me and said, the text read, "Are you okay?" And I was not aware that the countenance of my face was demonstrating that something was wrong. I didn't even know what I was reflecting on my face. And I wrote back to him, and this is one of these texts you do across the room. You know how you're not supposed to, but you do anyway? Right? Some of y'all are doing that right now, right? You're like, he's got a great tie on. I mean, that's a good tie right there. I'm like, I know, but I thought the pockets would be too much. I didn't know you. And so, but my point is, you're texting that stuff right now, and I know that. And it's okay. So he texted me, he said, "Are you okay?" And I wrote back, "I realize that I'm feeling such sadness that we didn't find the golden scepter. We didn't find the one thing." And I was feeling so sad. I was hoping we'd find the one thing. I don't think there's a full solution. I don't think there's a solution where the Baltimore-Washington Conference is going to come back after the called General Conference and say, everybody's equally pleased. And I think we'd all love to have it. I just don't think it's here. Now, I'm going to show you why that's difficult in just a minute. But here's part of the reason. In the United Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church is in over 95% of the U.S. counties in America. Isn't that remarkable? Friends, we're everywhere. We're in blue states, we're in red states, we're in Africa, nations where homosexuality is illegal, and in 6 African countries, that can include the death penalty. Just to show you the contrast of this culture and that culture. And United Methodists, your church, are in those countries. Next slide, please. Western Europe is very different from Eastern Europe. Western Europe is more like the United States. Eastern Europe is more like a very traditional Soviet bloc, former Soviet bloc country. The evolving views on homosexuality and LGBTQ inclusion are in the Philippines. Very traditional and yet now changing in many ways. Generations that have few issues with all this, younger, generations that have more issues with this. I've got United Methodists in my family, you know, a younger generation all the way up to my parents who still go to the church I was raised in every week and they're in their 80s. So it's just a big block of people. And so, as Gil Rendell says, there is no definitive answer except for people who have their own definitive answer. And if you've got a definitive answer, yes, you do. Congratulations. But the work of the commission was not to, the work of the church was not, the commission was not to lift up your definitive answer and make it the definitive answer. The work of the commission was to say, what are we going to do for all of us? 12 million of us around the world. That's a hard question. Next slide, please. So we're going to have to do some choosing. Your General Conference delegates will be a part of doing some choosing. We all have to do choosing. You do a lot of choosing in your own life, don't you? Right? You do it with your kids. You do it with your parents. You do it with your spouse. You do it with your friends. You do it with your colleagues at work. You do choosing. This is choosing work. So the question might become, can I have a couple volunteers, like 4 people? If 4 people would just come up here, I would really appreciate it. If you do it really fast, that would help us. If you could hurry, if you could run. I see 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. Let's take, oh, you all come too, please. 5, 6, whatever. When we started this work, one of the things that we did is we went out and we said, hey, we surveyed other denominations and other people that had already done this work. A lot of denominations have already done this work, so why not learn from them? I surveyed the Anglican Communion, and I called the Chief of Staff to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Doesn't that sound impressive? That's who I was talking to, the Chief of Staff to the Archbishop of Canterbury. I felt so much smarter after I spoke to him because he has an English accent. And don't you always feel smarter after that? And he said something really that was very helpful. He said, Tom, here's what you're going to discover. You will discover that at the end of this, because they've been through this, they're going through this, you will discover that you will either have to walk together loosely or part with a blessing. He said, however, if you part without a blessing, you are not in the context of Christian work. So remember that. If you are definitive on these things, just remember that if you part without a blessing, you just remember what Dr. Smith just talked about. See, you're excited about what Dr. Smith said because you love the thought of Christian unity and you love how the blood of Christ motivates you until it comes to a time where your definitive answers are compromised. So imagine this group of people. Thank you all for coming up here, by the way. Hey, give them a little hand. I mean, that's no small thing, right? Now, right now, would you agree that they look connected and unified? Would you agree? Did you notice that I did not prompt them, but when they came up, they were good United Methodists, and they stood right in a row? Did you notice that? This is a connectional ministry. They did that all on their own. They just knew that's our intuition. That's how we are as a church. Now, imagine that they feel different things on this issue about the outcome of this issue related to paragraph 161G, to marriage and to ordination. Just imagine, if you will, an annual conference where various opinions exist. Could such a thing happen? How connected will they be in the future? Now imagine that over the globe. Will the future of your church look like this? Or could you all go that way just a few steps and this way a little few steps? Or will the future of your church look more like this? Could you come together? Could you walk way over there and could you walk way over there? Or will the future of your church look like this? So that because you chose unity, some people said, I just can't do it like that anymore. Do you understand that any outcome we choose is going to produce something like this? You will either walk together loosely or you will part with the blessing. So the question is, how much distance and how much proximity? That's part of what we have to deal with. So friends, thank you very much. I know thank you. That's a hassle to come up here, but it's helpful. So we want to, the bishops gave us a mission scope, mission vision scope document. You can read that for yourself. It was spoken about yesterday, I believe. And the bishop said, we want to be as connected and unified. What are the last two words? Did you see the last two words? Because I think you saw the first couple of words, but did you see, what are the last two words in that phrase? I don't know about you, but that's like the most heartbreaking two words that I have dealt with over 17 months or 80 years, depending on the morning. To be as agile, responsive, and contextual. What does contextual mean? It means that we don't always do the same thing in the same context. Raise your hand if on Sunday morning the only music form you're going to receive is traditional music with a choir, a piano, or an organ. Raise your hand if that's your church. Raise your hand high enough that people can see them. What is this Methodist thing where we do this? I don't get this. We want to see your hand. Get your hand up there. Okay, now, put your hands down. Raise your hand if in your church you have a band and vocalists using a microphone like this. Okay, now, is the first group right or wrong? Is the second group right or wrong? I know some of you are like, they're wrong. No, just stop it. Friends, I've already got hard stuff up here. We don't need to produce anything else, all right? You know what I say to my two, we have a band and we have the traditional music and those two music leaders, I say to them, the first time one of you speaks ill of the other or the other's form of music, you are fired. You will not receive a second chance. You will not receive a please don't. You will simply be released from service to this church. Why? Because there are too many important things for us to deal with without dealing with that business. Now, what am I making a case for? I'm making a case for contextuality. It's okay in the church I serve if some people like the band and some people like the choir. Do you know what's so beautiful is these two people function so well together, they walk around our building and pray for the ministry areas of our building together. Now that's Christianity. They talk about how to encourage and support one another. They talk about how to share equipment. They talk about how to share time. And you know the Sundays that our church loves the most? Sundays our church loves the most is when the band and the choir work together on the same worship service. Okay, so there's unity, but there's also contextuality. Now, I know some churches are only band and some of that's affordability and some other issues. I get that. But my point is this. We know what contextuality is. It just means that we can worship but have stylistic differences within a United Methodist context. So the question is, can that be applied elsewhere? Some would say yes, some would say, well, it depends. To be agile, responsive, and contextual, what's the last two words? Live in and address the widest global and cultural mission as possible. It would be a lot easier if we were only doing this in the United States of America. It would be a lot easier if we were only doing this in the Baltimore-Washington Conference. The difficulty you've got is you're connected to a global church. And that makes it hard. And frankly, sometimes heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. And if you have not found yourself in a place of depression over the sadness of how lives are impacted by these issues all across the spectrum, then you haven't entered the dialogue yet. This has been one of the most meaningful aspects of work I've done. Oh my goodness, Bishop, this is how I always am. And it's also been the hardest thing I've ever done in the United Methodist Church. Spiritually, it has been hard on my soul. And you all know what that's like. Next slide, please. So we have to understand polarities. A polarity is two equal truths that cannot be easily held together at the same time. Do we want to be centralized? Do we want to be centralized? Same thing, same way all the time. Or do we want to be decentralized? You've got freedom to do in your context what you need to do. Next slide, please. A polarity is two equal truths that can't easily be held at the same time. And we've got some familiar ones. Is it law or is it grace? Is it faith or is it works? And United Methodists tend to say both. Actually, we answer that question with yes. Yes, it is law. Yes, it is grace. Yes, it is faith. Yes, it is works. Yes. You already understand polarities and the tensions polarities create. Next slide, please. And so the question is, in the United Methodist Church, how are we going to lean? Are we going to lean more toward a centralized life or more towards a decentralized? Are we going to allow greater uniformity, which could be unanimity? You understand the difference between uniformity and unanimity. Unanimity is like everybody does the exact same thing. Or are we going to be in a decentralized space where people have freedom, but they have to honor the mission of the United Methodist Church to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world? Next slide. Notice what happens. The upside of unity is that we have shared belief, practice, agreement, and clarity. But the downside of unity is that it can be rigid and exclusive. Words that some of you have used. Notice that the upside of contextuality, honoring the fact that we can do things differently, is shared identity and purpose. It's to be inclusive and responsive. But the downside of contextuality is you can actually get into a space where you have a lack of clarity and a lack of boundaries. So I believe deeply that what United Methodists ought to have is a desire to have a very strong set of sexual ethics for everybody. Because the Bible talks a lot about that. But I don't think most local churches talk about any of that. Next slide, please. So the question, which side of the polarity must the United Methodist Church now lean in order to live out its guiding story? That's what your delegates are going to be doing. They're going to be asking themselves this question, even if they don't know the question. Next slide, please. Which mission must the church now pursue? Now, this is really important. Are we going to deal with our public mission to transform the world or our private mission to care for our members? Are we trying to reach the world for Christ, or are we trying to make sure, and can I just say that the worst form of this on the private mission is the question of whether you're just trying to make everybody comfortable, which is why the majority of your clergy around the entire connection right now are not even telling their members that there is a commission. The majority of our clergy do not have the courage to come before their congregations and say, our general conference is dealing with an important issue. I'm not speaking of your annual conference, I'm speaking about our connection in the United States. Now, I can't tell you how this is happening in Africa, I can't tell you about the Philippines, I can't tell you about Europe, I can't tell you about the United States. And most of our clergy don't want to talk about it because, and what they don't understand is, what they are pursuing is a mission to make their members comfortable. Because my parents are in their 80s and their son's on this commission. My dad's like, son, it just feels like you're just making it really complicated. I was like, well, you know, Dad, you and Mom, it's kind of your fault. Because you raised me in a United Methodist church, and you told me I had to love people, and you told me we had to deal with hard things, and you and Mom, when you had complicated problems in the family, you all didn't just go to your rooms and go to two separate rooms. You fought it out in the halls, what I remember. So a lot of this candor you see in me, it's you. And I'm just like, shame on you, Dad. So, it's like that. So next slide, please. So you saw this yesterday. So the Council of Bishops has voted to share the work done by the Commission. Essentially, it's the One Church Plan. Skip 2 slides, please. This is what the bishops just put out recently. And you heard this reviewed yesterday, so I'm not going to do that. Go another slide, please. 3 plans. Now, let me be very clear about something. The Commission gave the bishops 3 sketches. And the words have changed a little bit, but essentially it's the One Church sketch, what is now called the Connectional Conference sketch, and a traditional sketch. And the bishop said, work on the One Church and work on the Connectional Conference, and then bring that to us down at the May meeting. But we have talked about a traditional sketch. And so let me just run through these very quickly because I want to get to the Q&A. Next slide, please. Pray for me, doing things fast and talking. That's really hard. The One Church Plan recognizes the diverse theological and scriptural understandings of the church. It is to say, we understand we don't agree. It provides a generous unity for conferences, churches, and pastors. Generous unity, what does that mean? It means it moves the slider over towards contextualization, meaning not every church and every pastor has to do the same thing around marriage. Not every annual conference has to do the same thing around ordination. And this plan removes that sentence in paragraph 161.g about incompatibility. And so it is very generous in that way. Generous in this is being used this way. It's not saying you can't do X, Y, and Z, which is a more restrictive way, and that's where we are now. We're in a traditional plan right now. We have been since the 1970s. Next slide, please. It removes the restrictive language, I said that, and it maintains the current structure of your denomination. It doesn't structurally shift anything in the denominational. Next slide, please. Thank you. It doesn't require anyone to act contrary to their convictions. Notice the word is act. Now, remember when I had the people up here before? There are people who are on the more progressive side that if we maintain a traditional view, they're just saying, look, I just can't do it. It's not that they're made to do something they don't want to do. It's that the association with that is something they can't do. And in this One Church Plan, there are traditional people who have said, I know you're not making me to do anything, but if the church is doing that, and if some people are doing that, I just can't be associated with that. Okay? So the word act is an important word here. We don't need to disagree about what the word act means. We need to just observe the truth that association is what drives some people crazy. Does that make sense? Okay, and then this One Church Plan allows congregations and pastors a greater freedom to reach new people. Why? Because LGBTQ persons and their allies are probably more likely to attend churches where they feel more affirmed. Now, there are traditional people who are very quick to say, hey, there are gay people that attend our church. And that may be true, that may not be true, I don't know. I'm a pastor, I'm in one church every single week. I believe those people, however. So I think it's really important as you get into this, it is not that traditional people are anti-LGBTQ. They are just holding a very convicted position that may differ from yours. Am I saying that it's a moral equivalency? I am not. I'm just telling you, friends, you're in a 12 million person denomination. And if an African person steps up and says, this is why I believe this so strongly, it is also possible that that person can sit in a room with gay people over an extended period of time and develop loving relationships. But wow, it's hard, because at the end of the day, that differential still makes me so sad, some days I can hardly stand it. Because there is a last step in all that. And that's just a truth that I feel a need to name. Next slide, please. Now, there is a Connectional Conference plan. This one's more complicated, so stick with me. Can I have 3 volunteers come up? Very quickly, no time. We don't have any time. So you're moving already. God's already called you, and you're already moving. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3. Thank you. I only need 3. Thank you. No, I've got them. You're fine. You're fine. And I did that not based on what who anybody is. I just did it based on who got up first. Okay, next slide, please. Imagine, if you will, a plan that creates 3 value-based conferences. An accountability conference, think very traditional. A contextual, think like the One Church plan. Different people can do different things. And then a third connectional conference that is justice-oriented, which means these people are deeply progressive or progressive, and they say, by the way, forgive me of my adjectives. Like if I say deeply progressive and I just meant progressive, can I do this under the umbrella of grace? Can you do that for me? I'm not joking. I know how sensitive all this is, and thank you for your grace. Progressive people who would say it is a matter of justice that we ordain qualified persons and we offer marriages where it makes sense for 2 people to be married, just as we do for heterosexual couples. So imagine, next slide please. Imagine in these things, this is what I just said, here no one can do a marriage and no gay person could be ordained. Here all can. No one must, no pastor must do a wedding. Some will and some won't. And this is a place where all that can live in one zone. And then over here, all shall. Does that distinction make sense? Okay, next slide, please. Thank you for helping me go fast. And then what would happen is the book of discipline, there would be a book of discipline for all 3 that would sort of codify that. Next slide, please. The current central conferences would have the choice of becoming their own connectional conference or joining one of these, but this would fundamentally alter your denomination. The Council of Bishops would be sort of a shared learning community, and it would be there for ecumenical relationships, but it wouldn't have the sort of the role it has currently as believing that we're one room, one church. It would feel that the divisions that are implicit here. Episcopal oversight, accountability, elections, assignments, and funding would occur within the College of Bishops of each connectional conference. Okay? Does that make sense? So this group pays for these bishops, this group pays for these bishops, and so on. Next slide, please. Annual conferences, like your annual conference, would have to come together on a timeline, and you'd have to say, which one of these connectional conferences do we want to join? But you're joining a connectional conference based on this issue. You understand that? But see, remember what I told you at the beginning, it's a slider scale. Do we want unity or do we want contextuality? You've got to choose. This plan makes you choose the most. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying that's what the plan does. The other plans may make the most people leave. Okay, so there's your trade-off. Local churches who desire to join a branch. So let's just say that the Baltimore-Washington Conference chooses this connectional conference. I don't know what you would do. Let's not take you. Let's take the Virginia Annual Conference where I'm a member. And let's say that Virginia chose this annual conference, or this connectional conference, but then let's say that I served a deeply traditional church, which I don't. I serve sort of a middle-of-the-road church on all this, which is to say everybody's unhappy. It's the rule of equal dissatisfaction. Do you have that? Like we all just show up and have a briefing on this and talk about how unhappy we are. And I'm the pastor, and I'm just like, awesome. This is what I signed on for. I'm excited. I got to stop talking. Okay. I don't even know what I'm talking about now. Okay, so the conference goes here. But let's say that the church I serve is really traditional. My church could opt out and join an annual conference that has joined this, and now maybe my bishop is in South Georgia. I know. So we'd be like a little missionary outpost up in Virginia. But listen to this. Here's what happens. Then you have real differentiation. So you can imagine that then the people that we would begin to really attract would be a little different. So you'd be able to market to that. I'm not saying this is a good idea. I'm just saying this is some outcomes. You have to think through what's the outcome. Thank you all. Thank you. Yes, very good. Thank you. Yes, thank you for encouraging me. Now, I'm not going to spend as much time on the traditional plan because you already have it and you already know it. You've been living it. Read your book of discipline. But any traditional plan coming to General Conference will be enhanced. It will strengthen the current language of the book of discipline concerning human sexuality for greater clarity. It will streamline the process to enforce penalties and violations for the book of discipline, which is to say that traditional people who have said, I'm really frustrated because the book of discipline is not being enforced, the book of discipline would be rewritten so that no one would have any options but to enforce it. And in some cases, if bishops didn't enforce it, they would be released from service. It depends on the traditional plan you read. But the desire is to have enforcement. It would maintain the current structure of the church. By the way, that Connectional Conference plan, that dramatically changes boards and agencies, all that would go away. It would be reformed because of how it's paid for. See, there's financial implications to everything we do. And in a traditional plan, it would continue the current relationships between the church and all general agencies and commissions, until such time as those are changed by General Conference action, which they can be now. Next slide, please. So the question before us is, who will we be? In what form of a faith community? Unity or contextuality? It's a slider scale. What type of unity? Seeking to do ministry with whom? These are the types of questions you're going to be needing to think about if you're a General Conference delegate. Next slide, please. Here's the timeline. Final report is going to come out around July 7th. It's going to come out to everybody all at once because that's fair. It's not fair when we release a report in English and French-speaking African countries don't have it in their own language, or it's not in Swahili, but there are English-speaking people in those contexts who then have power because they have language skills. That is colonial, and it's bad when we do that. And people that look like me need to say that, okay? And I've spent a lot of time in West Africa, in Sierra Leone, and I just have done the work long enough and respect the people deeply enough that that's the right thing to do, even though I'd like to share a lot more information with you. Summer and the fall, delegates are going to prepare for General Conference and the special sessions in February of 2019. There's where your timeline is now. Next slide, please. Okay, there's a praying thing, but you heard about this already. That's already started. Please do pray. Hey, do you think we need to pray? All right. If you didn't get that before, I hope you've got it now. Now, are there any questions you'd like to ask? And I'm sorry I have not honored my own timeline. So we've got a few minutes. Do you have any questions? Yes. Microphone 6. Oh, I've always wanted to do that. I didn't know it, but microphone 6, please. Okay, go ahead. It's awesome, Bishop. No, go ahead. Microphone 6.
You've written about the sugar packet model, and I think it's an interesting model. And it comes out in that three-church sort of, some have argued that in the end there aren't three, that it's going to sort itself into two. And Chris Ritter made the point that there's no such thing as a traditionalist compatibilist. Could you respond to that?
Well, there are at least two because they're two of my closest friends.
Okay.
And they are people who have said that they hold traditional views and they would not do same-sex marriages, but they would stay in the United Methodist Church if other people made different decisions. So I know of at least two. Neither Chris Ritter or I have any survey data. But I think it's my sense that a lot of United Methodists are people who understand, and we've chosen a denomination where we live with people who often disagree with us over matters that we think do not break unity of the church, because that's how our sanctification has happened. Most of my sanctification has happened because a brother or sister in Christ has disagreed with me, and I've listened carefully to their point of view, and I've changed. And that's over biblical issues and theological issues and even issues in this that are relevant to what I've just spoken about. So it's not that I'm saying Chris is wrong. I just think that there are traditional compatible people. The sugar packet presentation is using language that others have developed. This is a video thing I did. If you can look up Reverend Tom Berlin's sugar packet video and it'll show you. What I wanted to show in that is that the packets are leaking. What I was trying to show is that deeply progressive people and deeply traditional people actually understand each other, because in both cases they report that people are leaving their churches when the book of discipline is upheld and when it's violated. And we should be able to understand that in each other, and we just have decisions we have to make. Was there another question there that you want me to reply to? Yeah, so that's it. That's it. Thank you. 4, please. Microphone 4. Hey, everybody say it with me. Say microphone 4. Microphone 4. Come on, it's kind of fun, isn't it? Okay, yes.
Mary Kay Toddy, Dumbarton United Methodist Church. I guess my question is there a way to talk about this that is a little less disingenuous? Because it seems very disingenuous to me to use metaphors of church music as an example of the differences that exist within the United Methodist Church. That's at such a different level than it is to be talking about the differences where people's sacred worth is being denied, where people are being bullied and harmed because of who God has created them to be as gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer.
I'm pausing because I want to make sure that you're finished.
I just
fine.
think it's much
So let me
more
respond to
serious.
that, please. I disagree with you. I don't believe I was disingenuous about the complexity of LGBTQ inclusion or about the hardship this has created. I think I've actually said that several times in this presentation. I believe what I was trying to do is to help the church think about a very complex concept which is currently being, in many blogs, is being suggested that contextuality is a bad thing, when I actually think is a present thing. I think we already have contextuality, and I have a very limited time as your speaker to explain what I think are some pretty complicated issues like contextuality, and so I tried to use a metaphor that would be familiar to the average person. I was not trying to make that equivalent to the issues that my first slide shared, and that's where our disagreement is.
Yes.
I want to thank you. No, don't applaud. Don't applaud. Don't applaud because this is not a me versus her moment. All right? It is an understanding moment. I want you to understand that I also have people that I love who are deeply affected negatively by this. I also have church members who are persons who are transgendered, persons who are gay, persons who are in same-sex marriages that are legal. I also understand that. And I would argue that I have lived this very deeply for 17 months. And I would encourage you, I would invite you to assume the best of me. But I also want you to understand that when I do a presentation like this, I have people in the room for whom this is the very first time they've ever heard any of this material. There will be people, this is the first time they're like, wow, they haven't heard the word contextuality before. So as a communicator, my job is to explain that in a way that helps them enter into the dialogue that, quite frankly, no one else has helped them enter into. Your bishop is probably giving more time to this annual conference over this issue than any bishop in the Connection. And I've surveyed it. Most annual conferences are giving it 15 minutes to an hour total. So if I did that, I would want to apologize to you. I in no way desired to act like this is a simple thing or a funny thing. I will say this, when you are filling this time, you do want to communicate in ways that keep people with you. And my job is not to build a case for a plan. My job is to communicate what the plans are about. So thank you. Microphone 2.
Thank you, Mark Johnson, Towson United Methodist Church.
Excuse me, Mark, let me just pause. Bishop, I was told to end because you've got another service coming. How many questions would you like me to take? Okay, we're going to take this one, and I am not sure who is here next. Oh, 3. Okay, this is the unfun part. I tell you what I'm feeling negatively about. and let me just say it out loud. I've got 2 white people at these microphones, and we're going to take 3. Let's go to you first. We're going to do this fast.
How do you anticipate the One Church plan will affect itinerancy?
I'm sorry, say it again.
How do you anticipate the One Church plan will affect itinerancy?
How will the One Church plan affect itinerancy? I believe that it would be wise for bishops to create a sense of knowing about their churches, and I believe it would be wise to identify churches that would be very open to having a gay pastor enter into their space, a qualified person enter their space who happens to be gay, so that those persons could begin their ministry in a space that is welcoming. I think it would be unwise to assign people randomly. And I don't think that's going to be that hard to do because the numbers are not going to be incredibly high. You're not going to be dealing with 1,000 people here. You're going to be dealing with each year a few people. And I think we're going to have to figure that out. As we have figured it out with cross-cultural appointments, gender-related appointments, we've figured that out over time. And it's not always been easy, but we sure would have been smarter to have started by saying, who would welcome this? So that people can enter into spaces that are not harmful to their psyche. I would like to take microphone 7 and then 3. Yes.
Tom, Joe Daniels, Emory Church in D.C. Good to see you. Just very quickly, for inclusion's sake, and in the spirit of Dr. Shively Smith, who talked about oneness, this is an opportunity I want to extend to the commission, and I applaud your work. There is not one African American clergy, male or lay person who is not a bishop on the commission.
No, Scott,
Which,
from New York Annual Conference, layman, Scott Johnson.
okay, not one African American clergy person who's not a bishop represented on the commission.
You have to say male because
Male.
Jasmine
I
Smothers
said,
is.
I did say male.
Yes.
I did say male, but the point I'm making is that there is a whole community of African American males who are being left out of this conversation, and it says something deeply about the inclusionary nature of our church. And I just want to lift that up as an opportunity to extend to the Council of Bishops and to the Commission that there is a segment that has been left out of this conversation that deals with this issue on a daily basis and needs to be heard.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That observation is accurate. There is no African American male clergy person on the commission is an accurate observation, and thank you for that.
You're welcome, and if we can get a copy of the slides, it would be great.
There. You know what? Your conference has them, and you're welcome to them. Yes. Yes. And now, finally, microphone 3, and then we're done.
Patricia Bittner from Flintstone Charge, Flintstone, Maryland, local pastor. I feel like I am a red apple. Not for the reasons that perhaps a lot of people think that I'm feeling that way. My question is, if the churches don't agree with the One Church plan, is there an exit of grace? And if not, why not?
If the bishops would affirm that there is already a way for churches to exit, and I'm quoting a bishop who said, and it is already gracious. We have 4 churches currently in the Mississippi Annual Conference who have either left or are in the process of exiting, all of whom, I believe, have retained their property. One would argue that that's pretty gracious. They've not gone to court. They have not had expensive legal fees. So I'm giving you not the totality of the connection, but we've also seen that in this jurisdiction, in Pennsylvania. The bishops those that work in this area legally for the bishops have put together training that they've all been through about how to do such an exit. Now, the General Conference can create a plan of exit that is like a broad set of doors that many, many churches can walk out of. The thing that will be really important in that is to make sure that we cover the unfunded pension liability for 5 pension plans that currently clergy enjoy. especially the unfunded pension liability for the pre-82 pension that your oldest clergy in this room and those who are not able to be in this room because they are not able to be here, that has to be covered because those are our most vulnerable clergy in our connection. And so that's a real, those people need to eat. And so we have to have the money to cover that. And when churches leave, many people say, well, why can't they just pay 6 months of apportionments? Well, the reason is that's not based on math. Pension liability is something that the Board of Pensions can calculate. So I believe what the bishops are trying to do is to do this very carefully and avoid harm that nobody's thinking about. There are a lot of unintended consequences that could come out of a mass exodus. And I get that we want to do a mass exodus, many people, for convicted reasons. I understand that. But it's unfair because we made promises in the past to people that we have to uphold. And these promises have to do with their income when they no longer have the ability to create income. So the General Conference absolutely can attach an exit plan. You will see when the report comes out some wording to that extent. And that's all my covenant allows me to say to that.
Yes,
Thank you.
I understand. Thank you.
Can we show our appreciation to Tom?